Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm a shark. I was grading your spirals and I just noticed a troubling trend, and I just wanted to make sure that I reached out to you and figured out what was going on here. Okay, so I see that a lot of you don't want to factor. All right. And I don't know if it's because you were never really taught or you're not comfortable with it or something, but there are times when you kind of have to factor or you're not going to be able to answer the question correctly. Take, for example, question 4 on the most recent spiral. It says the quadratic equation, and then we have the equation there, where k is an element of all reals, has real distinct roots. That means that the discriminant is going to have to be greater than 0. So once I set up that discriminant, I'm going to get an inequality, which means that I'm going to need to test my solutions on a number line. And since this is a no calculator question, the only way that you can really test the solutions on a number line without spending 9 hours is to know how to factor, right? So this is why this is an important skill, and I think it's worth making a video for you. So I have 2 squared minus 4 times k minus 1 times 2k minus 3 is greater than 0. So that's 4 minus 4, and then in parentheses I should have that 2k squared minus 3k minus 2k plus 3. All right. Now I'm going to distribute the negative 4. Okay, so now I'm going to factor, and the first thing I do when I factor is I want to pull out a GCF because that makes the numbers easier to work with. So here I would see that the GCF is going to be a negative 4. So I'm going to divide every term by negative 4. That goes out front of the parentheses, and it stays out front of the parentheses, because when I test my solutions on a number line, I'm going to need that factor out front, because look, that negative is going to change every sign that goes on the number line. So I got to keep him. Then inside the parentheses, I'm left with 2k squared minus 5k plus 2. All right, so when I factor something like this, so I'm currently factoring this. So I'm going to kind of pop it out over here so you can see me work slowly and carefully, and you can see exactly what I'm doing, okay? So when I factor a quadratic that has a leading coefficient other than 1, I'm going to find the factors of a times c. What do I mean by a? It means this times this, so the leading coefficient times the constant, that add up to b. And I make myself like little kind of circles, right? So the factors of a times c will be 2 times 2, which is a positive 4. And I need those factors to add up to b, which is negative 5. So then I start listing the factor pairs of 4, 1 and 4. Can I manipulate either one of those signs to make it become a negative 5 when they add together? I sure can. They both have to be negative. So I take those two negative factors and I split the b term, meaning I make the first, or I turn this negative 5k into a negative 4k and a negative k. All right, now I'm going to factor out a GCF from each one of these. I now have a 2k out front. I am left with k minus 2. I'm going to pull out a negative 1 from both of these pieces. Right? So what did I do here? I pulled out a 2k, pulled out a 2k, and then from here I'm pulling out a negative 1 that goes right here, and now I have k minus 2. If the number in the parentheses here and here matches, that becomes the GCF that I pull out of both of these pieces. When I pull out that GCF, what am I left with? 2k minus 1. That's the other factor, okay? So now I have negative 4 times k minus 2 times 2k minus 1 is greater than 0. Okay, so do you notice how if I didn't factor this, I would never have this part right here. I would end up having solutions, which are fine to go on the number line, right? But then once I have my solutions, right, what would it be? K equals 2 and K equals 1/2. What would I test my values on the number line with? Right? So a lot of you guys got to this point and then you're like, okay, well, this is below 1/2, this is in between, this is above, but what am I testing in, right? All I have is the quadratic formula. I don't have a factored form to test my values in. So that's why you need to factor when you're doing inequality solutions by hand with no calculator, because you would need to see that when I plug a 0 into the factored form, right, I have -4 times 0 minus 2 is negative, times 2 times 0, which is 0 minus 1, which is negative. A negative times 2 negatives gives me a negative times a positive, which gives me a negative, so this is a negative, okay? When I substitute in a 1 to my factored form, I have -4 times a negative, and then I have times a positive. So now this becomes a negative times a negative, which is a positive. All day it's a positive. 3. I have a -4 times 3 minus 2 is a positive, and then 2 times 3 is 6 minus 1, which is a positive, so this guy is negative. I want where the K returns a positive value because of my inequality symbol. So I'm not including right at 1/2 and 2 because those are zeros, but I would be shading in between 1/2 and K. So do you see why you must factor in order to fill out the number line for a quadratic inequality? My vacuum is now talking, so I'm going to get off this thing. Bye.